everybody who joined us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. I want to thank everybody who joined us online. It's day 268 of heroic resistance of the Ukrainian people, and now we will be talking about a very important subject of the experimental procedure for issuing certificates for return of Ukrainians who were forcibly deported to the Russian Federation. I want to introduce our speaker. It's Aliona Luniova, the Advocacy Manager at Zmina Human Rights Center. Good afternoon, Miss Aliona. Good afternoon. Miss Aliona, it's a very important process. Can you please tell us how it will be implemented? What are the steps already processed and worked on? It's a complicated job that was done, and maybe there are some solutions which are now ready. I want to start that from the 24th of February, when the full-scale invasion against Ukraine started, we started getting anxious signals about deportation of Ukrainian citizens into Russian Federation and Belarus, and the number of people who find themselves in the territories of other countries is more than 2,500,000 people. And this is the information coming from Russian Federation. We cannot fully trust it, but we don't have any other details. What's the number of these, out of these millions of Ukrainians who are currently in Russian Federation, don't have passports, don't have their documents which certify their citizenship? But we know that there were cases like this, that people found themselves in Russian Federation without any documents, and if a person doesn't have any documents, it means that they are hostages and they face a lot of problems over there. And starting from 24th of February, the consular departments of Ukraine in Russian Federation don't work. It means that our citizens who are in Russian Federation have no protection by their government in the enemy's territory. We started discussion about how we can help to those who were forcibly deported to Russian Federation, and how can they be provided with an option to either return to Ukraine or leave for other third countries. And the solution was found. The Cabinet of Ministers adopted legislation about issuance of certificates for such persons, so they could return to Ukraine. So such certificates have been issued in the territories even of the third countries in case a person loses documents or the documents were destroyed. But in this specific situation, if a Ukrainian citizen finds themselves in the territory of Russian Federation, there is a procedure when State Migration Service in Ukraine can issue such document for their return. So there are two ways. First of all, it's the application by a relative who should apply to a department of a State Migration Service. They should apply with a relevant set of documents to have this certificate for return issued for their relative. After that, their relative receives the document and can send it through volunteer organizations or otherwise to their lost relatives in Russian Federation. So another mechanism is when a deported person doesn't have relatives in Ukraine, they can apply to the Ministry of Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories, and the Ministry of Reintegration applies to the State Migration Service to issue such a return certificate for such person. So this is the procedure under this experimental project. Aliona, do we have any guarantees or understanding that Russian Federation will let those people go? Well, nobody can get any guarantees from Russian Federation ever. But this certificate, it's a picture ID of the specific form. So if there are reasons that Russian Federation will not let those people go, I cannot name any such reasons. other than the Russian Federation will just close the exit for such citizens, and they don't need any reasons for that, because we had Ukrainian citizens apply to us who found themselves in the border trying to leave Russian Federation after the announcements of so-called partly mobilization, but we have no guarantees from Russian Federation. But now we see that for the time being, Russians still let such people go, those who want to leave. So those people should have at least some document. So the procedure that is offered is just one of the procedures. We can talk about a number of ways. If people have no documents at all, this is the chance for them to receive such certificate and to leave Russian Federation. What are the plans? How can we inform such people who became, in fact, hostages of the Russian Federation? First of all, we have to work with the organization who are involved in evacuation from the occupied territories and from Russian Federation to the third countries, because in fact they have access to such people who are in occupied territories or in Russian Federation, who work with such people who plan to leave but they don't have documents. But we can also talk to initiatives. The basic initiatives, they work in Russia in the compact dwelling sites of the Ukrainian citizens deported to Russia. We have to communicate with them. We post the information in our official website, in the websites of the civil organizations. But to have people who are in Russia hear us, we have to talk in different ways, because some people who don't have relatives in Ukraine, they have to receive this information too. How soon will this procedure start working? The procedure started working on the 14th of November. It's not so old. It's only 4 days old. The information campaign is still in place. So I hope we will have applications, and we will have more applications, because it's important for us to give any option to the Ukrainian citizens to leave Russian Federation. That territory is dangerous for them. If a citizen of Ukraine turns out to be in Russia, we always advise them to leave, no matter how good are their relations, no good are their attitude of their relatives. If, for example, in Russian Federation, Ukrainians are always under the microscope from FSB, so if they have such an option, they should leave. As to the government, which bodies do you communicate with for implementation of such procedures? You mentioned State Migration Service, you mentioned Ministry of Reintegration, maybe Commissioner for Human Rights also gets involved. The initiative was coming from State Migration Services. I appreciate it because they were quite flexible in this regard. It's not very, so to say, widespread practice when government initiates such procedures themselves, because, for example, the issuance of such certificates to return to Ukraine is the prerogative of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but the state is flexible in this regard, agreeing to such shift of authorities, because part of such authorities for this particular situation is being taken by State Migration Service. Also, there is a coordination headquarters headed by Ms. Irina Vereshchuk, and it's established to return Ukrainians from occupied territories and from Russian Federation, and many initiatives go through these headquarters. Not only this initiative, which is already approved, adopted experiment, but it's the simplification of identification of Ukrainian citizens who live from occupied territories and activities of international diplomatic institutions, and is the State Border Service who takes care of the actual entrance and exit of people to Ukraine or out of Ukraine in case people don't have documents, and it's Border Service who actually identifies the people. And the Commissioner for Human Rights also gets involved in all the discussions and initiatives which promote any ideas of how to help our citizens who find themselves in Russian Federation. It's more negotiations with the commissioners for human rights of other countries. There might be like association who can make visits to Russian Federation, but in this case we're talking more about occupied territories where we have prisoners of war. And now we have a very powerful synergy, very powerful cooperation with the government authorities, and we cannot appreciate it more. And all these initiatives are being seen in a very practical way by the government, and we cannot like keep it unnoticeable. Is this procedure coordinated with the third countries? Because we understand that the direct exit is impossible. If any of our citizens wants to leave Russia, they will need to use that logistic way, coming to Ukraine through a third country. Do they know about that? Well, not only this procedure, but any other procedure was coordinated from the beginning of the large-scale invasion with other countries, because according to our practice, we see that because Ukrainians are being let into the countries with any documents, it's like the expired documents or any other type of documents. If somebody lets Ukrainians, it's first of all our Western partners, Finlandia, Georgia, Poland, Estonia, for example, but negotiations are still going on because there was information that for the citizens of Ukraine which stay in Russian Federation for a long time, there were many questions to them because like why are you living now, not 8 months ago? But there is less such questions, and we're still having negotiations with our Western partners, and they take it normally that Ukrainian citizens may not have a normal set of documents that should be in place normally. And when a Ukrainian citizen gets to the territory of a Western country, they provide support in receiving a new normal set of documents which will allow Ukrainians to stay temporarily in those countries or to come back to Ukraine under normal procedure. Dear colleagues, your questions. Irina Udodenko, Ukrinform. Will such procedure work for the children who were forcibly deported into Russia? For the people who were deported into Russian Federation, the specifics is that they don't come back by themselves. We have to have documents either from their relatives or foster parents who adopt this function, so their procedure is more complicated for the children. And if there is an idea to have a child brought back from Russian Federation to Ukraine, we have to do it with the help of the Ministry of Reintegration, for example, through their National Information Bureau. This information should be reported. There should be Office of the Commissioner for the Human Rights, because their department also actively takes part in this process, or this should be the Department of National Police who investigate the issue of investigation, or other law enforcement agencies, because the deportation is a war crime and there may be different actors from the side of law enforcement. Again, because for the beginning we have to identify a foster parent, so somebody who can provide all the necessary documents to the Russian Federation, because there were cases where child is already adopted by a family and the child should be taken away from that foster family. But at the same time, I want to say that if a Ukrainian finds themselves abroad and they don't have documents, for example, birth certificate for a child born actually in Ukraine or in the occupied territories, so we can talk about adding a child to the return certificate if the family was deported and they don't have documents. When they when they have those documents produced for them, if the child is not alone, if the child is with the family, with the parents or relatives, so those return certificates cover the children as well. So yes, this procedure may be applied to children as well, but in case the child is accompanied. From which age we can talk about a child when a child can live by themselves? Starting from 16 years. So even from 16 years, even using this procedure. In case they have a birth certificate, yes, we will test it, but it's not that we know a lot of cases like that. So again, if relatives of a child know, or maybe they don't know about the destiny of a child, or if they know that the child is in Russian Federation, they should apply to relevant government authorities. And this is the only way to return a child, because the child will not come back by themselves, and the Russians will not let them back, because the situation is critical in those moments when a child became orphan during the war and they need help from their relatives to come back to Ukraine. Miss Aliona, thank you. Thank you for this conversation. Dear colleagues, I will remind you, we had Aliona Luniova joining us, Advocacy Manager at Zmina Human Rights Center, and I will remind you that our next briefing is at 14:30, and we will talk about the resolution of the court about the downed flight MH17, so bear with us. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.
Дякую.